This is Entrepreneur Authorities. Whether you're building your brand, scaling a startup, or getting started, this show equips you to take your next big leap. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today I'm joined by Matt Domo. Matt builds systems leaders depend on. As a co-founder of Amazon Web Services, he architected the database division and helped launch the first cloud computing database, then shaped early enterprise and early AI platforms at Microsoft and Rackspace. Today, as CEO of Fifth Vantage, Matt helps senior teams turn AI strategy into execution inside real organizations. Matt Domo, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm super excited to talk with you.
Oh, me too, Matt. And so I want to start our conversation because, I think for founders, there is an air of coolness. Like if you found a company, it's really cool, especially if it's successful, Matt. And the fact that you can drop in conversations that you're the co-founder of AWS, I want to get an idea of what is it like walking around as Matt Domo when you drop that in a conversation? Because Matt, you're a handsome guy, but you're very nondescript. You look like an average Joe, but then when you drop that is that like a nuclear bomb going off in the middle of the room when you mention that?
It can be. I don't use it to ever silence people. I use it as a credibility point when necessary, right? And it adds authority. But we're always living in the present, right? So the key is, what did you take from there, and how does it apply where it applies to the present? And then some people are like, "Oh yeah, really?" But then when you start talking and they get the information and the vibe, but they're like, "Okay, this person knows what they're doing." And that's the most important piece, right? One thing I tell founders, avoid hubris. You're right. There's an air of aristocracy and excitement about being a founder. But if you're the founder of something that goes nowhere and you deliver hubris, you get sidelined really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, obviously your career was built on taking risks. And I think for most entrepreneurs, there is that level of risk. But your risk is a little different because you risk your career on building things that didn't exist.
Yes, sir.
So which I think is probably the most extreme part of being an entrepreneur. When you're an entrepreneur and you come up with a widget that's better than the last widget, sure, it makes sense. But when you're creating something that doesn't exist and bringing it to life, tell me about where that mindset comes from.
That's a great question, Joe. So I've never really had a fear of failure. I had a fear of not delivering the results that I promised. That is always front and center. When I was raised by my parents, gave me some really great values. And it's always do more than you promise, follow through on your commitments. But don't be afraid of change or doing something. And when I went to Microsoft, when it first started, I mean, moved all the way around the country. And my first taste of it, nobody would take on the project. They thought it was a suicide. And I'm like, well, you know what? What the heck? I'll just do it. And if I fail, I'll just go home. I never failed. And that is due in part to mentors and other stuff that people recognized I had some skills that I myself didn't. But it is that having a confident, true north compass to drive you and help you understand you can figure it out and work with people. There's no one man band. There's no Swiss Army knife. You've got to use your phone of friends and all those things along the way. But once you recognize that, some really, really great outcomes can happen.
That's cool. And obviously you've been called the future architect, but you often say when you were starting AWS, it wasn't about predicting the future. So connect those two for me. The idea that, when you were setting out AWS, it wasn't about you didn't have like a crystal ball that said, "Hey, this is going to be the end all be all." But in the same regard, you are known as the future architect. So tell me about those two things.
Yeah, okay, so how do you predict the future and and all that. And it's really about how do you identify the patterns that resonate, that create value for your client, right? And so if I look back at AWS, we thought, okay, we've automated and done all this work to power Amazon.com to get it to the scale it was at that time, right? And so we saw value. We knew the economic simplicity scale value because we lived it. One assumption you have to be careful of, which is predicting the future, is assuming that people feel and understand and experience the same thing, right? So part of the predicting the future is trying to really understand the problems that your customers, I call them the me's, have. And you see a lot of people hacking on the same thing, the same constraint. Then they're saying, hey, there's value to be had in identifying that problem. And then you start, that's a signal, right? That's an adoption signal. And I see that pattern everywhere. It once you seize on those signals, then and you can identify how they connect together, then you start to have a cohesive trajectory, and that's how you kind of stay out in front. Does that help you?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I always think about, like entertainers, when entertainers work on a project, right, Matt? They're going to do something that will probably take 2 or 3 years for that thing to come to fruition to then finally get into the hands of the consumer, right? And what's always fascinating to me is that in a way, when they're creating this thing, they've got to think a couple steps ahead because they can't be thinking about what's hot now because by the time their thing comes out, that what's hot doesn't exist. So there is a way of like, not that you're predicting what the future will be, but almost you're predicting what people will want at a particular time.
Yeah, I mean, let me give you an example. So to your point, I'll use price, right? We knew once we started to build trust, which means people used the product, we got over our assumptions of our messaging and started to make it simple, easy, frictionless, reliable. Now that built trust signals that it's okay to use this thing, right? Now you start to your point of thinking ahead. Now it's not about usage, it's about adoption. How can I go in a product level or service level context? How can I think ahead and determine what could spur adoption? Right? There's many facets to that, but let's go on to your point thinking ahead. Price. We modeled out, my as VPGM, I built the P&L, I was responsible for it, and I modeled 3 years, 3 to 5 years in advance, every price decrease, assuming we would get better at automation and cost reduction, and which would drive margin expansion, right? Less people, less stuff, less time, right? And assuming we would get there, I'd model out, hey, in this time frame, I'm going to drop price. At this time frame, I'm going to drop price. Whether to hit the exact day or not is immaterial. But using that as a true north to drive decisions you make in the moment is extremely valuable. And that's what you tie back to your entertainer, right? The messages they deliver today and whatever they're doing set the tone for what they're going to do down the road. It's the same paradigm. And by the way, again, I'm big about mentioning patterns. This pattern is present everywhere if you're willing to look for it.
And one of the things you talked about in your early AWS days was almost betting ahead of demand, like building it up so that once the demand was there, you could take, like, this is a random, like connection, but like Netflix had for whatever reason, every time there's a big event, there's a big crash. Like at the beginning of the year with the Stranger Things finale, it crashed. And like, I think the layperson will be like, well, didn't they know like a lot of people are going to want that thing? And so I'm curious in terms of how you bet on demand in terms of like being able to withstand the number of people that will be using the service at certain peak times and such like that. Tell me about the idea of like, again, not predicting demand, but like betting on what the demand is going to be.
Ha! Actually, I'm going to recalibrate the question towards speed versus architecting for failure, right? In any initiative, we obsess about how fast we can deliver stuff, right? How fast can we get this out there so we can learn whatever? Sometimes it's better to go slow. And how you position this to your board and your leadership is the risk profile, right? It's not about speed. What you want to do is come back and say, look, if we invest in this or not, here's the risk we take. And I will bet that when that was done, to your point, they didn't measure the risk of, well, what happens if 10x the people show up and we didn't build in our platform, our features, our infrastructure, the capability to withstand the things we didn't think about, right? And so that's where you have to build some level of in an architecture, if you're building a platform, some things about how you can fail gracefully, but not hurt your client.
That's great. That's good stuff. And it's funny because with entrepreneurs, obviously, they all know the statistics, the failure rate in jazz. But once they get that thing to actually succeed, so they've avoided the whatever the dreaded 2-year jinx of like startups failing, and then comes the S word, scale.
Yep.
And you often talk about scaling ideas and scaling systems. And for most people, like especially entrepreneurs, if they're the visionary entrepreneurs, they're usually not thinking about scaling systems. They're thinking about scaling their idea. Tell
Yeah.
me about connecting those two things.
Look, ideas are easy to launch, right? You can there's been no better time than right now to be able to create something. I can create a mobile app in 45 minutes, put it out there. Incredible. Think about that, right? So ideas are easy to launch, but systems require designing for the failure mode we described in your scenario, handoffs between all the different elements in the team, and thinking about how you're going to maintain it from day one, right? This is what systems thinking is, and the difference, to a pattern that you can now help with leaders, regardless of startup or size of company, is whether the leaders think and design for a future where they're no longer the hero, right? System scale when success is not person dependent. We all live in it and we celebrate the person that went the extra mile, the person that did the dive and save. And it's worth saving. But if you live moment to moment from the hero, you've got a problem. And so I always tell my folks, in my mind, the heroes are the people who design, think, approach, deliver in a model that we don't need heroes.
Nah, it's good. And that's why I see a lot of entrepreneurs failing because their brains are just not wired for that. Their brains are like what you mentioned at the top. The ideas, like especially now, being able to execute the idea, but the nuance and the work that takes place to put those systems that work, it's hard. And I'm curious in terms of like, how you've learned to work with other people. Obviously you've worked within and with some of the biggest brands and companies on the planet.
Yep.
And there's always this thing of collaboration and competition. And I know for a lot of large companies that they, they almost use competition as a carrot to be like, hey, you gotta be better than the other guy. But that also doesn't fuse sort of or build a culture of collaboration. So tell me how those two work in a world that you come from where collaboration, everyone says, oh, that's great. But then you have these other leaders who are like, oh, I like the competition that comes from pitting employees against each other.
This is a situational awareness thing because what you're describing is the pattern, but it's not always constant, right? So what it really means is when the situation arises, what are the things you need to do to try to do it? Because the leader may change based on the goals of the company, the pressures the board's facing, what customers are demanding, etc. Like so the key is, look. I always think of everyone. So for the collaboration thing, with the platitude is the rising tide raises all boats, right? And so, but what I really think about is if we do this well, everybody wins. Because at the end of the day, look, if you're a senior executive in a big company, it's a sacrifice. You're giving your life to this thing, right? So people want whatever benefit they value as an incentive. But if you can figure out a way where everybody wins and everybody gets us what mostly they want, then some really good magic happens. So here's an example. One of your peers needs a really great person to go solve a problem, and you either have that person in your team, lend them over, send them over there and say, hey, look, if I look in the spirit of 1 + 1 = 3, if we send this person over there, does that make that better? Yep. Okay, we'll do that. Now, what does that demonstrate to as you as a leader doing that? It's not about me, it's about us. It also builds trust, especially if that person delivers, right? Or you may find, say, hey, I see you're looking, this person in my network happens to be open, can fill a role, right? And you start to help people build around you, and that builds trust, it builds authority, it builds respect, and it also helps build the entire, now back to your thought of feature versus now you're starting to think systems as well, right? Because you're thinking, how does the organization win as a system? And then when it gets to the competitive mode, look, and it does happen, right? The best thing to do is not get in a mudsling. The best thing to do is say, look, I promised Joe that we would deliver this with value. And regardless of what happens, you do what you say, you abstain from doing this, you drive things back to data driven things that impact the customer, things that impact the company, things that impact the employees, and steer direction to the benefit backed by data of doing things. Then you get out of the scarring of, I call people whipping each other with sticks, right? When it gets competitive, some people start coming at you. But if you can be objective and steer it that way and keep the sticks down, in the long run, it really does create the everyone wins scenario. And the other part is, look, you're delivering what you said. You can't beat that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And I want to shift over now to the founder side because incredibly, over the course of your career, not only the AWS thing, but like the fact that you helped create an entire category, which I think it's pronounced DBaaS. Did I say it right? Or
Yeah, database as a service.
okay, so you helped create that platform. Now, my question to you is, so that's a platform, right? What if a founder comes up with an idea and whatever the thing is they're doing is actually more of like a feature or a thing as opposed to becoming a platform? There's so much to that. Help me unpack that.
Well, yes, there is, but there's some early signals that you can see which tell you whether you're on the right track or not. So
Okay.
let me give you an example. When customers value you only for using a specific feature or capability in the portfolio of your offering, then you don't haven't created enough operational gravity yet, right? So if you have 10 features, but they really only use 2,
Right.
then you really haven't. And so the pattern here to think if you're a founder, a leader, is features deliver value in moments. Platforms enable themselves into workflows, into trust models, and decision making over time. If it's easy to swap you out because you don't help them enough, you're not going to become a platform. It really is that simple.
And so for the so how is it like I said, is it more of just like the numbers game? Like if you have 10 things and people are only using one, You're not a platform, you're just like a feature. Like, so how do you bridge that gap then? So if you have these 10 things only 2 people really find useful, do you then do you sell? Do you become part of something else? What happens then?
Okay, there's 3 core blueprints, and it really does cross industries, and there's value in each. You just have to decide if the value carves out enough for what you're trying to accomplish as a business. What you call feature, I'm thinking point solution.
Okay.
In the operational flow of a workflow in a business, let's say you're tracking where your deliveries and your supply chain are to customers to delight them, right? If you offer a segment of that whole workflow and only a segment of it, that's a point solution slash feature. Now, the question is that valuable enough, right? So one way is to say, yeah, I'm going to carve out in that entire workflow, which is incredibly complex, but I'm going to be world class at it, and it's so important to their operational success, they don't switch me out. Then I can generate that at scale and make money. The feature or point solution's really valuable, right?
Hmm.
Then there's the question you brought up earlier of the platform. Well, we've developed enough capabilities to scale, but if the scale model is such that we enable others to go off and build things and they offload and use us to find their place in that workflow, and we can do this in multiple industries or verticals or a small number, but we get 20 people developing features for manufacturing, and we carve out that niche and make it simple, easy, frictionless, reliable for them to create value. Now you're starting to think of yourself as a platform or an ecosystem, right? People come to you because they get value. It's always about value. And then there's the end to end solution. Do you solve the entire end to end solution and workflow for a problem? So, like I talked about, how effective am I delivering to my product to clients? Right? That's from the time things come in till it goes in the warehouse, till you load it on a truck, till it goes out. There's many steps, okay, but that's the piece. But if you deliver that in a way that customers can't live without you doing it, now you become a core part of the operating system of the client. And that's where you want to be if you own the entire workflow. You're indispensable. They can't easily swap you out. And that's all based on that value. I tried to, so it really does come down to those 3 models.
And it's funny, if you're able to create something like that, you avoid what a lot of companies run into is the dreaded tech stack, where you'll have 11 different programs for like, whereas one platform will actually offer all of those things in one. You're seeing a lot more and more of that instead of the old a la carte way of doing things. So that raises your platform, right? If you're able to offer what 8 or 9 little things could do, but you offer a one-stop shop, man, you've raised the game there.
As long as they get value in the way you deliver those 8 to 9 things,
Right.
right? It's not check a box.
Mm.
Yep, we have that, right? That's product washing. If you deliver value in that collection of 8 to 9 things done on your platform or ecosystem adds more value than anywhere else, that's the winning ingredient.
Well said. Well said. All right. So we're doing a business podcast. You're a tech guy, and it would be illegal for us to have this conversation without talking about artificial intelligence, Matt. And so this ties in perfectly with actually like sort of like your career ethos of like looking ahead, future architect. And, we are seeing reports of billion-dollar companies investing trillions into AI. So they are betting ahead with very large amounts. And Matt, we're both a lot old enough to remember the dot bomb era. We are getting a lot of the feels of that now. But tell me about like this idea of AI leaders and how they're able to invest in the future.
okay, so I'm gonna give you this. Like I spent my entire career building things that didn't exist that you pointed out, and then living with the consequences when they scaled. So if I'm an investor, that's super important. And co-founding, working in co-founding AWS, it wasn't about predicting the future. It was about noticing where people were struggling and taking responsibility for solving that and being willing to course correct when our assumptions were wrong. And what that experience taught me is that technology doesn't fail first. The architecture does, the leadership does, and most importantly, accountability does. And I take that lens and perspective in everything I've done since. So, how I think about about AI, how I work with leaders, and why I'm so focused on progress that actually delivers and holds rather than hype, because hype fades, right? So, we've hit the smattering with that onset in the questions you've asked. Is there a bubble? Gee, Joe, I don't know. I will say though, there's a lot of people that do what I call AI washing, right? I sprinkle AI here and in my marketing and my literature and what I tell customers. It's kind of like the old English adage in World War II, keep calm and carry on.
Right.
Use our AI and carry on. But if the AI doesn't add value, doesn't solve a problem they care about. Remember, your feature versus platform, or is really hype, right? Then you're at risk. And I don't know how many people are doing that versus a bubble, right? And there is a vector here of what's hype versus real, right? When you deliver something that makes demonstrable impact on the way people work, or the way customers get value from your company or system, that's real ROI. That's not hype.
Mm.
But if you deliver stuff and that's unclear and you don't make it clear and you don't adjust to do it, that's risk. That's hype.
I want to double click on the word value you said because there was like a poll last year, and it was one of these like magazine or .com polls where they asked consumers, would you buy something that was AI enabled, like it was like an AI enabled toothbrush, and I think it was like only like 30 or 40% of people wanted that because they're like, I don't need my toothbrush to be AI enabled. I just don't need. I don't have the value. And you've seen this race over the last couple of years of just like everyone just slapping AI on everything. Like, even if it really makes no sense, they'll just put it on because it sounds good or looks
They're
good.
AI washing. I'm
Yes.
washing my message with this.
So,
Exactly.
so tell me about how that is going to affect. So how do you connect that, right? If people are AI washing and consumers don't really care, what are we doing?
Wasting time. Look, what you nailed the answer with the question you asked at the outset. What do customers value? Right. So to your toothbrush example, it's hard, but let's click on a little bit. How effective was the toothbrush at coaching you about how to spend time and where on your gum line and your teeth and give you some kind of indication of where to focus, etc. Hey, the value is if I did that and made my gum health, however boring this topic may be for people, but if that made my teeth health and my gum health and me more effective, what is that? That's value. Right? Now, could AI have been used to understand your brushing patterns and strokes and whatever? Yes, but that's a mean to the end for the value creation, right? It's kind of like let's take ourselves out of AI, right? Like you go to the doctor, Matt. You present e pluribus unum and whatever, and I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible. No, it just means you have a cold. Well, why didn't you tell me that in the first place? Right? Yes, you did this test and this diagnostic, but you're not speaking in my language and understanding me, who I am, right? So if I'm a marketer, I'm a business leader, etc., don't lead with the AI, lead with we're trying to solve this value for you and deliver it in a way that's unique that somebody else can't do and understand, right?
That leads me perfectly into what you're doing today now, Matt, and that is as running Fifth Vantage, which you call an anti-consultant company. First of all, let's give a quick little plug for Fifth Vantage, and then we'll get into what you're doing there.
Yeah, so a little plug. I lead a team referred to as the Avengers of AI. We're builder led. We're not theorists, we're not academics. We're actually builder led and have all the battle experience that you described with your questions earlier. And we're all about trying to get in, meet our clients where they are as partners, move as quickly as possible, help soup them up so they can operate without us, and then move on, right? Just like the Avengers, they assemble a team with individual superpowers and they come in and help you get you onto the path to success, make sure it's sustainable, and then we move on. And that's not so that's the anti-consultant thing. We actually solve problems and soup you up, but don't create slideware.
I love that. And so, in terms of who these people are you're working with, what sort of in the terms of the entrepreneur spectrum are they at when they come start working with you? Are they at the beginning? Are they in the middle? Are they towards the end? Tell me about the folks you're working with.
In the history, it's been all over the board. We're jumped in with, one of the Andy and Jeff. Andy Jassy, CEO of Amazon, and Jeff, one of their board members, started a company. He actually was the former managing director of the NSA,
Okay.
general of the U.S. Cyber Command. They're like, hey, could you jump in and help this guy? And they were startup, and we helped them transform their business model, their go to market, their team. But it started piece by piece, and the more value we created, the more we kept going, and eventually they went public, right? But that was the startup. We worked with large enterprises. You know, um, Sometimes they need to understand clarity. Again, back to my e pluribus unum analogy. Is it the LLM or what you're really trying to add value and how it maps to the business goal? And how does it delight the constituents that care? Okay, now let's piece together what that looks like and then, go do it. So that could be a division of large enterprises or medium-sized companies. And so that's the value that we've been able to go in and do.
And how does it usually work? Is you mentioned the anti-consult because most consultants they want to be with you. They want to saddle up to you for a couple years and squeeze as much out of you. Like, how long does this process work? And I know obviously there's not a one shoes fits all kind of thing, but like generally, how long do these relationships work, Matt?
Well, ideally they work for they call us back for whenever they need us, right?
Okay.
But the key is we try to figure out what's the best thing for them where they are and where they're wanting to go and give them this work with them together that way and produce the solution. So, and how fast it goes, you can't predict because you can't predict somebody else's decision making. So, I'll give you an example. Working with a medium sized international parts supplier for construction, and they want to build an AI capability, right? But and they have an idea, but before we even jumped into AI, they were obsessed about AI. First things getting them aligned as a leadership team is what does success truly look like to you, your constituents, your clients, your customers? Let's start there, right? And then, so that was a 2-day workshop just to align people. And we're like, let's start here and make sure that you feel value and we helped you. And if you decide there's more, great, we'll go. Otherwise, at least we've left you in a better place than where you were in the beginning. We didn't push, we didn't sell, We were hands-on, an extension of their team, again, creating value. And I don't want to sleep at night thinking about how I can stick 1,000 people to go work here. That does not make sense to me. My sense to me is how do I help you achieve your mission possible, right? And that creates a scenario where everyone wins, and that's, part of what I lay out in my book is some playbook pieces here that you don't have to be a consultant, but how you as a leader can layer in some of those ways to make your organization successful.
That's great. Matt, you know how like in back of books there's like blurbs of like other authors saying like, "Hey, read this book because blah blah blah." It's usually like a friend of the author, right? And I'm sure you've had these or written these before. If someone were to work with Fifth Vantage, what would the blurb usually look like at the end of it? Like what would they usually like what's the one like if they ran into someone who's like, "Hey, heard you work with Fifth Vantage." Like what was that like? What's their usual blurb after come out?
I'll actually tell you a conversation that I had with a chairman of the company that why they chose us. All right, and we're just getting started. We didn't feel like they tried to sell us anything. They felt like they were really in it to win it with us and wanted us to succeed, whether we picked them or not. Gave them information whether you want with us or not, because we just want you to succeed. We want everybody to win, right? That's one. Number two, we never sold. They never felt like they were being sold. Number three, they felt like we were easy to work with and relaxed. It wasn't stress. We weren't making them feel inadequate. We're all like collaboratively, what to do. And then finally, it's the builder's perspective, right? We can help you separate what's hype from what's real for your situation. And we'll demonstrate that with you as part of your team, not in a slide. We'll actually help you design what to go build and then go do it. And, back to the Avengers model. And then finally, people do like the Avengers of AI, which is why I went and got the trademark. Because it is a symbol of the model of everything we do and our ethos and the way we do it.
Wow. It's so funny. We love, I don't know if it's a Western culture thing, that we love to overcomplicate things. And you work in obviously a complicated world in that startup ecosystem. But the things you described of what you do well are so freaking easy, Matt. Like, it wasn't hard sell. We were nice. We under promise, over delivered. Like, it's so simple what you do in a complicated world. And I think, you're obviously very humble about it, but man, that is harder than it looks for most people.
Yes, it is. I'll tell you one thing. I'll walk away if we're not a match. If we don't think we can help you or you're resistant to some people want help, but they're just showing the board, I couldn't find anybody. Let me do what I want, right? There's that level of people. Well, we can't help you. And if we recognize that, why waste your time or ours? Right? That's one thing that comes from experience. It rarely happens, but it has. But if we really can't do that, why waste everybody's time, right? So that's an edge case to point out, where we go. And look, we'll work till you're satisfied. Like I put in there, like we guarantee you're gonna be satisfied and we'll work till we make it right. So few people do that anymore, right? At the end of the day, if someone's, giving you money, they're expecting value. Deliver the value and work till you do. It really is that simple.
That's awesome. All right, so let's wrap things up with a golden nugget from Matt Domo. What should leaders keep in mind, whether they're venturing off on their own, they're hitting you up for advice, they're working with Fifth Vantage? What's the one thing you want leaders to keep in mind from over the course of your career, what we've been talking about for the last 30 plus minutes? Leaders, what should be right there, top of mind?
If there's one thing I've learned, it's that most leaders don't fail because they lack ambition. They fail because they don't slow down long enough to architect responsibility. Right? That's the theme of almost weaving through almost every element of our discussion, right? You're responsible for the outcome. You're responsible for this. And when change is designed thoughtfully, people win, organizations win, and the business wins. And that's what I mean by mission possible. Progress doesn't have to be reckless to be bold. And when it's done right, everybody wins.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Matt, if folks want to get in touch with you, I know you're all over the interwebs, but where should they start? Is there a website, LinkedIn? Tell me where people should start if they want to connect with Matt Domo today.
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Joe. I would direct you to mattdomo.com. And when people say, "Hey, like, let's have a conversation or request a discussion," I read every one of those personally myself. Because I care, and if that makes sense, we'll engage and have a thoughtful discussion.
Awesome. Good stuff, Matt. We have a few more of these chats scheduled over the coming year that I'm looking forward to digging more into that brain of yours. But until next time, he is Matthew Domo, CEO and founder of Fifth Vantage. Matt, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Joe. You had some really great questions, made me think and delve on some things, and I really enjoyed the experience. I'm looking forward to doing these again.
Ditto, Matt. See you next time.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for this episode. If you're an entrepreneur ready to grow your industry recognition as an author and entrepreneur.com contributor, go to authorities.entrepreneur.com.